Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Arts Workshop. We are a group of comic book creators. We've been doing this since 2016, I think. We were doing it live before COVID, and then we had to switch to Zoom during COVID. And as much as I like to go back live, every time I ask a guest if they prefer Zoom or live, they usually say Zoom. But Adam is on the West Coast, so he can't come out to Chelsea. So
I'd be happy to if somebody, invited me. I'd certainly go.
We couldn't invite you without paying your fare, and that's that's not in the budget right now.
I'm in Virginia. I wish I could come to your comic workshop, but I'm going to need some transportation.
Don't worry about it, Char. We're just doing Zoom for now. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, but last month we did have a live event for the people who are local, and it was just like sharing portfolios, things like that. We didn't have a speaker or anything like that. So
Gotcha.
anyways, today we are very honored to have Adam Beechen, whom I met very early on in my career, which is I can't believe it's been 8 years already. I mean, it's not a very long career. It's my third career, I think. So anyways, Adam was very kind and actually gave me a blurb for my first collection. So
That's right.
I was very really appreciative of that. And I hadn't heard of Adam because I had read his graphic novel Hench prior to running into him at I think it's at Newark Comic Con or East Coast Comic Con. I don't remember.
I think it was Newark.
And did that ever happen again? I don't even remember having another Newark Comic Con after that.
If it did, they didn't invite me, which means I must have made a terrible impression.
So as many of you, I'm sure, have read his bio on the meetup page, he's done comic books and he's done TV. And so it's very rare we get somebody who's got experience in both. So we're pretty excited to have him here today. So without further ado, I would like to, if you could please, I know most of you guys are muted, but just give a nice round of applause for Adam.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming.
So Adam, I have a list of questions which I sent you ahead of time, but I will probably deviate based on what your answers are a little bit. A couple of follow-up questions.
Right. Then sounds good.
Halfway through, we're going to open it up to the audience, and I'm sure they have other questions. So Adam, can you tell us about what you do now lately? What have you been doing lately?
Well, mostly I've been writing animation, which has been my career since the late 90s. So most recently, I was the producer and story editor for the latest season of Lego City Adventures, which you can find on streaming and online. And that was a ton of fun, but I've also been doing some work in the preschool space, writing for a Coco Melon spinoff and a couple of other places. And right now with the strike going on, there's not a whole lot happening here in Hollywood. So I'm working on my own stuff, hopefully to have ready to go when the strike finally breaks and we can start selling stuff again.
Have you actually gone on the picket line?
I have, yeah.
I didn't realize we had picket lines over here until a friend of mine said that they saw a couple of actors on the picket line out here.
Yeah. Well, it's
Char, we're gonna hold the questions until we're gonna hold the questions till the end, okay? Now, let me ask my questions first, and we'll have you jump in with your question the second half. Thanks. Okay, so
I live pretty close to one of the studios. I live close to 20th Century Fox. And so it's a really convenient hop, skip, and a jump for me to go over there and pick it, which is really just walking in circles for a couple of hours with a sign. I'm not sure that it's necessarily changing any studio heads' minds, but it's nice to feel the solidarity of being with fellow writers and actors.
I think the actors are probably helping a lot.
Yeah. They certainly make the picket line much better looking. So.
Anyways, so you're writing TV now, but you also were writing comics early on. So how did you break into comics?
Through writing for animation. It was a confluence of a couple of different things. One was that I was friends with a guy named Larry Young, who started his own publishing outfit, a company called AIT Planet Lair. which is no longer publishing comics, unfortunately. And Larry and I were friends when he was putting the company together. He and his wife, Mimi Rosenheim. And he said to me, basically, if you want to come up with a story, I'll publish it. I'll find you an artist and I'll publish it. I said, great. So I came up with the story, and he published it. So I had a graphic novel that had been in stores, which was very useful. And then the way I got to DC was that I was writing for the original Teen Titans cartoon. And I would go to recording sessions, and there would frequently be Warner Brothers people there, and sometimes people from DC, including one of the editors from DC, who was a friend of mine from college, a guy named Ivan Cohen. And
Okay,
Ivan,
yeah.
and I reconnected. Ivan now writes the Scooby-Doo Batman mystery comic, if you ever see that out on the stands. I think the last issue of that came out today.
Yeah,
But
we had
anyway,
Ivan as a guest on here too.
oh, good. Okay. Well, I went to New York for, to visit friends and whatnot, and visited Ivan while I was there. And he gave me a tour of the DC offices. This is back when the DC offices were there. And in the course of wandering around, I met the editor of the comic book that was based on the Teen Titans cartoon series. And I asked them if I could someday pitch to the comic. And they said, "Why do you want to pitch to a comic? You're already writing television." I said, "Because it's comics. Come on." And so I pitched him a story, and he bought it. And a couple months later, I was writing the comic book that was based on the Justice League Unlimited cartoon. And that's how things got started for me at DC.
Did you work on the Justice League Unlimited cartoon too?
No, I never did.
Oh, okay. I don't collect things, but I do collect those Bruce Timm action figures.
Oh, they're amazing.
Oh, yeah, they're amazing.
Yeah.
So it seems like you were able to leverage your TV writing to get into to do some comic book writing. And if only we could all do it that way.
I've been really fortunate.
So then how did you break into TV writing?
I studied screenwriting in graduate school at the University of Texas. I knew I was going to move to Los Angeles, and I knew that I was going to need an agent, and was going to have to try and hit the pavement and all that stuff. So I sent out letters to all agents that would accept unsolicited submissions, and told them I had writing samples. I sent out about 50 letters. I got 2 back, one asking me never to write them again, and one from an agent in upstate New York who said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, send me your stuff." So I did, and it turns out that agent had never worked as an agent before. She had never been to Los Angeles. She had never met anybody in the studios, but she had letterhead that said she was an agent, and that was good enough. And she liked my writing. Actually, I found out that I sent her my samples, and they sort of sat on her desk for a long time until her son came home from college one vacation and just picked up my script off of her desk and read it and said, "Hey, this is pretty good, Mom. You should give this a read." And so she signed me, and I moved out here already having an agent, but not having a job. And I worked for a long time as a script reader, back when that was actually a job you could have. I was reading movie script submissions to various studios and books and things like that, and then writing summaries of them and comments on whether or not they should option those scripts. So when you send a script to Hollywood, chances are they're being read by somebody like me, a yacht fresh off the boat, who doesn't really know what he's doing, somebody's assistant probably, and that's how it gets to the higher ups. So I was the gatekeeper, as it were. And while I was doing that, I was taking meetings that my agent was getting for me with animation studios, which were more open to meeting new talent than, say, CBS or NBC or ABC. So I did that for a while, had those meetings for a while, and then nothing happened. I went back to being a script reader for a while, and I was getting ready to quit and move out of LA. And I got a call from my agent, and she said, "Would you be interested in writing a script for a new cartoon that Nickelodeon is going to be doing called The Wild Thornberrys? They read your samples and they really liked them, and they want you to come in and do a freelance episode." So I did, learned a lot, met everybody there, and then they put me on staff. And that began my entire animation writing career. And that was 1997, something like that.
Uh-huh.
So everything's come out of that.
Okay. Cool. I remember the wild thornberries.
Good.
Well, well, you actually answered my third question already, or it was my fourth question. Um, now that I know that you're primarily doing TV, because usually the pathway for most people is they'll write comics and then they'll write something like prose or TV or film. So you kind
Yeah.
of like did the reverse thing. And
Yeah.
it's been primarily been TV. So rather than asking you my fifth question, the difference between the two is I'll just ask you, what was something that you discovered or didn't realize or surprised you about once you became a TV writer or animation
When I
writer?
became when I became a television writer, what did
Yeah,
what did I
once you
learn?
were in the business, what was something that surprised you?
Oh, how many stages there are of the development and production of a cartoon. There's the coming up with the story, there's the actual writing of the script, there's the dealings with the producers and the story editors to get the notes, seeing all the stages that the art goes through from character design to storyboards to what they call animatics, which are very rough sort of assemblies of the storyboards so you can get a sense of how the story is pacing and how it's going to look, to actual final versions of the cartoon itself. And it takes a long time. It's a long, long process. And that was an adjustment. That was something I did not really know about.
Did I read correctly that you were a showrunner at one point?
I have, yeah. Well, I've run the writing of a couple of shows in the course of my career. So
What does that mean when
um,
you say you're a showrunner?
it means that I'm sort of in charge from a story standpoint of the direction of a season of a particular show that I'll come up with the studio executives or the network executives so that we're all on the same page. And then my job is to work with the writers that I hire or that the studio will hire to come up with every script. So I'll work with the writers to break down the story into various story beats. I'll read their outline and make some notes on that if things can be pumped up or whatever, and then all the drafts of the script, and then finally I take a pass at the script myself to make sure it fits with the feel and the flow of the show that we're doing, and basically supervise the writing of every script of the show. And
Um,
on other shows, I've also worked with the directors and the animators at all those steps that I mentioned earlier. And I'll have notes on that, or they will give me some ideas for stories or what have you. So it's much more integrated. It's not just the writing
okay.
side, but also the production side.
What does that mean when you say a story beat?
An action or an event in the story that is important to getting that story told. You've heard about inciting incidents that start off stories. You've heard about plot points that end act. Anything that is an important beat of the story that moves the story forward towards its conclusion.
Got it. Now, when you're writing comics, do you find that I guess um how different is it? Because when you're writing a comic book compared to writing an animated show.
It's how do I explain that? It's a lot more descriptive than, at least everybody's comic book writing process, from what I understand, is different. Some writers like Alan Moore will write hundreds of pages for a 22-page comic, and they describe everything down to the most minute detail. Other writers will just say, here's what happens on this page, go, and the artist will break it down into panels, and then the writer will come back and dialogue those panels. What I do is I describe each panel and put the dialogue in so that the artist has the clearest idea of what I'm seeing, and the kinds of emotions that the characters are expressing with their dialogue. So I think of it as directing on the page. I'm describing storyboards. I'm describing the images that I think the page should have. And that can involve figuring out what the page is going to look like ahead of time. It's going to be 8 panels, and this is going to happen in panel 1. This will happen in panel 2. Or this page is a splash page, and it's just one big image. And I always tell the artists that I'm open to changing anything that they want to change if they feel like they have a better way of telling the story or getting that story beat across. The only thing that I'm really concerned about is what happens at the bottom of the page. what happens before you turn the page, because you want to always have a cliffhanger that's going to
Right.
make the reader want to turn that page. So I say to the artist, if you want to change that, just let me know and we can discuss it. But let me know before you do it.
I guess that's one of the big differences. You have a hard time because in a film or TV script, you can describe several actions within a scene. In a comic book, you can only have one action per panel, right? So did you have a hard
Right.
time transitioning to that kind of writing? And again, and also
Right.
what you said, the ending of the page, which you don't necessarily have on a TV or film script, except maybe the end before the commercial, or maybe the
Right.
end of you know.
That's true. And you don't want to describe too much in a television script, whether it's animated or live action, because they have directors who do a lot of that stuff and do a lot of the figuring of those things. So the script is really a blueprint, and you want to leave room for other people to contribute their ideas and make the whole script better, which they inevitably do. So you sort of walk a fine line when you're running a television script. Am I over describing things? Am I not describing things enough? And hopefully, if you work with the director of your particular show and the storyboard artist of your particular show, you know what kind of information they need in order to do their job to the best of their ability.
Is there any collaboration? Do you guys do storyboards with the cartoons?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. The
Are you
artists
collaborating
definitely
with
do
the
storyboards.
storyboard artists too as you're writing?
No, not as I'm writing generally. I will see the storyboards after they've read my script and completed, all of their design stuff and what have you. So I see the storyboards well after the script is finished, and then at that point we can flip through the storyboards and say, okay, this action set piece isn't working. Here's what we can do to make it work. Or this conversation between these two characters isn't dynamic enough visually. Let's change camera angles here and let's do this and let's do that. So the collaboration comes after the first pass of the storyboards are done, but the script is already pretty much done.
Now, you said earlier, even especially when you're a showrunner, you're dealing with executives, you're dealing with all these people. So either as a showrunner or as a writer, how much autonomy do you have in shaping the story?
Depends on the show and depends on the network, depends on the studio. If you, I know people who have had a lot of autonomy, and the studio just says, go off and do what you do. We love what you do. We trust you. That doesn't happen very often. And I know people who have said that the studios have very heavy hands in their production, giving notes on everything, sitting in on meetings, making sure that everything is done the way that they want it done for their network. And it really varies. And hopefully you're able to find out what your bosses want before you start the job. Otherwise, you can find out in the middle and it can get a little confusing. You have to have everybody on the same page right away if possible.
It seems to me that if a cartoon was conceived by a studio versus a cartoon that already exists as an independent YouTube thing, that say something like Rick and Morty or even The Simpsons, which came out of the Tracy Ullman show, it seems like maybe those creators might have a little bit more autonomy than somebody who's coming in and working on a property that's owned by the studio, created by the studio, originated from the studio.
That's certainly true. But even a property that you come up with and you sell to a studio yourself that has never been produced in any kind of media can also have a lot of studio and network input. There's a reason they bought it, and it's because they see something in it. They see a potential for it that will bring a lot of viewers in, and they want to maintain that, and they want to say, we love what you have sold us, but we think that if we pump up this element even a little more, it'll bring more people to the table. It'll be funnier. It'll be more relatable. So they're going to have notes regardless. It's a very rare occasion when you get a show like The Simpsons, and I don't know what kind of notes The Simpsons gets from Fox. I assume not many, because they've been doing it for approximately 4,000 years. So it's very rare to get a situation like that where they really do trust the creators to know what they're doing and to let them do what they do.
Okay, here's a very self-serving question on my
Sure.
part.
I won't loan you money, Ramon. I'm not going to.
Okay.
No.
Okay, next question then. Okay, here's my question. Do you think, or what do you have? Do you see any commonalities with animated shows that are that, or what makes a good animated show, or what makes an animated show more easier to get on the air? I guess.
Wow. If I knew the answer to that, I'd be at work right now. Uh,
But do you
and
see
we'd all
any?
be
Do you have any theories, or
billionaires.
see any? Have any observations?
Things change from time period to time period. Certain things are in vogue for a while, and then they're not in vogue for a while. Sometimes you'll have a lot of cartoons on at the same time about small animals solving crimes. And then that won't be popular anymore for a while. You'll get shows about kids solving mysteries, and then that won't be popular for a while. Or superheroes will be all the vogue, and then people will say, "Oh, we've had enough of superheroes. Now we're doing something else." So you sort of have to read what the marketplace is saying when you look at other shows that are on the air at the same time you're out pitching your shows. But my feeling is personally is if you come up with an idea that you love and a story that you love and characters that you love, try to sell that regardless of what the marketplace wants. Because if you are committed to it and you believe in it, and you make it great because you are that passionate about it, then somebody will find it and agree with you, hopefully, and put it on the air. But don't try and write to a specific audience because you won't have the same level of passion that you would if you're creating something on your own.
I got it. But I guess I was asking more about, like, I guess most animated shows have to be funny. It's one thing, right?
Most,
Most
most.
they probably have to have really, I mean, this is also common sense. I'm not ashamed to even ask. They probably have to have very, very interesting characters.
Helps.
Quirk, would you say quirky is better than not quirky?
It depends on the show. If you're doing a show about an average family and in average middle America or whatever, something like a Bob's Burgers, those characters are quirky, but they're also very relatable. People can see a lot of themselves in those characters, working class or parents or what have you. They see a lot of themselves in those characters. We've all got quirks. Those are all going to come out in the course of developing over the course of a series. But quirky is usually fun. People respond to that, and especially in a comedy setting, they like to see the bizarre and the weird and the out there. That's one reason why Rick and Morty has been so successful. Why SpongeBob was so successful. Why any cartoon you can name has been successful. So yeah, I think quirkiness is important.
One of the things I noticed, the difference between, when you said average family, just I've had a flashback. Remember, wait till my father gets home.
Vaguely, yeah, I was pretty young, but yeah, I do
Anyways,
remember that. I remember the song.
I remember the song. Well, I remember the show. It was an average family. But anyways,
Right.
what I wanted to ask was, what I noticed the difference between the cartoons when I was growing up, when my kids were watching cartoons, is that the cartoons that my kids were watching, they were very sarcastic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that is like a permanent trend? I haven't seen any animate cartoons lately, or is that just
No,
that was
I
just
don't.
a time?
I think it was just the time, and probably the genre of cartoon that you were watching.
Uh-huh.
There are plenty of genres of cartoons that aren't sarcastic, that are really more based in physical humor, or situational, as opposed to characters, cracking wise and being smartasses. And I think that's the case now too. I think there are certainly shows like that are on the air, but it all depends on the kind of audience the network is trying to reach with that particular show.
Got it. Okay. I'm gonna ask one more question and I'll open it up to the audience. Now, everybody here pretty much has a pretty good idea of what a working comic creator's life is like. It's all deadlines
It's
and
sad. It's very sad.
it's very sad indeed. So when you're on television writing, is it a 9 to 5 job? What kind of a day do you have?
It's interesting. My first job writing for television out here was for a primetime drama. And everybody said that primetime dramas have better working hours than sitcoms, because sitcoms, you have to produce a show every week. You're doing it in front of a live studio audience. You are there rewriting late, and you can be there for 17, 18 hours in a day. Whereas for a drama, because you're filming it, the schedule isn't quite as tight. And so it tends to be more 9 to 5, whatever. Animation is kind of the same way in that regard. There are certainly times when your deadline is looming and you haven't gotten everything finished and you have to pull all-nighters. But for the most part, you can make it a regular working day. These days, with so many writers working from home and working freelance, writers make their own schedules. And as long as the script is done by the required date, nobody cares how much, how many hours you put in necessarily. They just want you to know, they just want to know that you worked hard on it and did your best on it and wrote the best script possible.
Got it. Oh, by the way, do you prefer writing an animated TV, or do you also like to do adult drama and stuff like that?
It's a good question. I moved out here to write primetime drama because that was the stuff that I watched and the stuff that I responded to the most. But when I had the opportunity to write animation for kids, it was such a thrill because I remembered so clearly watching those kinds of shows when I was a kid. So it was a little bit of wish fulfillment to get into animation. And there's a lot to love about doing cartoons. So I like them both. I like them for different reasons. Primetime dramas can hit you in a lot of different kind of emotional centers. You can have comedy, drama, suspense, mystery in one show. Animation tends to be a little more humor oriented. Sometimes it's action comedy. Sometimes it's comedy action. But the fun of seeing cartoon characters up there saying your lines when you remember watching those shows and wondering how they ever got made in the first place when you were 6 years old, 7 years old, that never goes away.
Do you prefer episodic TV as opposed to maybe a feature film?
In some cases, I think there's a lot to be said for a simple story well told in a 2-hour setting that has a beginning, middle, and end, and you don't need to have a franchise that's going to promise you 17 more movies. But at the same time, the episodic structure, you can tell a bigger, broader, grander story, weave in more characters and more subplots and plot lines. And that can be really satisfying too. So I have favorites in both areas.
Got it. Okay. Let's open it up to the audience. I know I said this 3 questions ago. So if anybody has a question for Adam, just unmute yourself and go ahead and shoot.
Don't literally shoot.
Well, yeah.
I've dealt with fans
I have
before.
a
I know how that
question,
works.
Adam.
Hi.
When will the strikes end?
That's a great question. And if I knew the answer to that, I'd be working right now. The story is that negotiations are going very slowly. Not a lot of progress has been made between the writers and the studios. And there is a sense that the strike could go on through the end of the year and could bleed into next spring, which would be disastrous for everybody out here in Hollywood. So we're hoping that things get settled quickly, but the issues that remain to be dealt with are really big and really important. And the Writers Guild is remaining very strong in the face of the studios not negotiating in a way that we would like to have them negotiate.
Also, I'd like to ask if you're going to ask a question.
Artificial intelligence, isn't it?
Part of it is about artificial intelligence. Yeah, there is some concern that artificial intelligence can take away some of the aspects of the writing process that human writers have traditionally completed. And by removing those steps of the process, studios wouldn't have to pay the writers as much. So they could say, you're not doing the outline. The computer's going to do the outline. We don't need to pay the computer. So we're not paying you because you're not doing the work that you had done on previous scripts. So looking for ways to cut costs is what a company does, a business, a studio does, and that makes sense. But you lose, I think, by doing that, especially with AI, some of the human, certainly some of the human element of storytelling and the heart and the creativity that goes into that.
Thanks, Char. I'd like to ask if you guys are going to ask a question that you turn on your video. So who wants to go next?
Can I
Jonah?
go, Ramon?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Adam. Nice to meet you.
Hey.
Nice to hear from you. So I actually work in children's book publishing myself, and you know, I noticed that the kids' books that tend to do super well, and I guess the animated shows that tend to do super well, tend to be very, very funny. Um, so I don't think there's necessarily like a secret or a silver bullet for this or anything, but in your experience, what tends to be the secret to making something funny, or I guess just trends or tips? Like, again, I know it's a hard question, but I'm curious to hear your perspective.
It is a hard question. My rule when I'm writing something that's comedic is, does it make me laugh? Would it make me laugh if I was the age of the intended audience? Is this something I would find funny if I was 7, if I was 12? Although what I find funny now is pretty much what I found funny at 12 anyway. But does it make me laugh? And then I trust that if it makes me laugh, that other people have similar kinds of senses of humor. And there's certain stuff that we can all relate to. We can all relate to family dynamics. We can all relate to embarrassment. We can all relate to strange physical things happening that you're not expecting. It's just what makes me laugh and what makes me smile. I try to put that into those kinds of comedy scripts.
Okay, another question from somebody else.
Hey,
Yes, Mike, go ahead.
well, continuing on with AI, because AI is already being used for a lot of art department stuff, and
Yeah.
we don't really have a union. I mean, I do storyboards, but mostly for the independents with no money and never get back to you when their project ever gets off the ground.
Yeah, it's true. I'm sorry, what's your question?
Oh, AI for the art department, especially storyboard or concept art, since I've seen so
Yeah.
many YouTube channels popping up, putting up these videos of like, ooh, Star Wars by, if it were done in some Italian fashion style or something like that.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the positive side of the technology we have now, is that anybody can be a creator and put their work out where everybody can see it. And that's good. As far as not having a union for storyboard artists and animators, there is such a thing as the Animation Guild out here that does represent animation writers. It's not as powerful as the Writers Guild, and the contract that it has with studios doesn't provide for as much as a Writers Guild contract provides for writers. But there are artists, directors, all kinds of technicians who work on animated shows and movies that are represented by a union. It depends on the producers you're working with. And they can decide whether or not they want to make it a union production or not. If they make it a union production, they will probably get better talent and more experienced people working on their shows. If they're saving money by not being a union production, then they feel like there are people out there who will work for the credit rather than for a share of the profit.
I was in a debate a few weeks ago about why comic book industry doesn't have a union when the Writers Guild has a union and they're very powerful. And I think one of the people said, well, the writers, the producers can outsource the writing to other countries as well. And I said, I don't think so. So unlike artists, you can hire artists from countries where they don't speak English, and it's fine. You're not going to find quality script writers for the American market overseas as much, I would think.
I don't know that I would be that general. There are talented writers everywhere who can write for whatever market. It's a matter of finding them, and they tend to be in great demand. But certainly, I think studios tend to think that if I can't get this writer who is a member of the union to write for my show, there are a lot of people in line behind that writer who are just as hungry, who would love to write a show for half the money or a quarter of the money. And while you're going to save money by doing that, you're not going to get, I don't think, the same kind of quality of writer necessarily 100% of the time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Question, anybody else?
Oh, well, one more question. Will the strikes in Hollywood last forever?
I
No,
hope
it's the
not.
same question. We don't know.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully the two sides
Yeah,
come
I
together
would
and start negotiating
imagine
for real soon.
robots. I won't imagine robots or cyborgs or any
Tyler, do you have a
artificially
question?
intelligible devices
Yes,
running Shakespeare.
Char, I'm gonna give some other people a chance to ask questions, okay?
Okay.
Thanks. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, this is actually more about your experience, but I heard that you did that you did work on Ben 10, and I was a huge fan of that series, so I was just curious to hear about your experience working on that franchise.
Yeah, I get asked about Ben 10 a lot of the shows that I've written for. It's surprising to me how often I get asked about Ben 10. And I worked on a number of different versions of the show, different iterations of the show. So I worked for different story editors and different producers on each of those shows. And I never wrote more than a script or two for each one. So I wasn't there on a day-to-day basis. I can't tell you what it was like behind the scenes, but I really enjoyed playing in the sandbox of that world and of that show. And the best part of that experience for me was working with the different story editors and learning about how they work, what they like to see in a script, what they need for their particular iteration of Ben 10, and then trying to get it to them, trying to give it to them. So that was a really educational and productive stint in my career.
I see. Fascinating.
Anybody else have a question?
yes.
Go ahead,
Um,
Ricky.
So recently I did meet another DC writer more for like comics. And she told me a lot about the experience, like how it was to write for DC. And I I guess it also applies to like shows as well. I wanted to know because a lot of the online assumptions is that a lot of the backstory of the characters you're writing is sort of provided for via like editors, at least for comics. I'm not sure how it works for animation. I was wondering if you had any like um when you get hired to write a character, do they give like a approximate summary, or would you have to put a lot of personal research into like reading and writing past works of such characters? And because
Sure.
I know like depending on the character, there's like a lot of lore and a lot of existing media
Yeah.
that you would have to catch up to. And I know like especially with comic books like DC, they tend to be a little bit critical with portrayal specifically, and I know that sometimes I talked to a few editors too. They have a lot of work to do, and they don't always have like the workload doesn't always match like the amount that they can handle, so they do miss
That's
out
true.
on some things, like especially like important lore, and then the writer or the editor gets blamed for it. I was wondering how much like when you're writing for characters, how much personal research do you put into writing each character?
Well, speaking specifically about comics, because I grew up a comic book fan and I've been a comic book fan for almost 50 years, I don't mind doing the research. So if I got hired to write Robin, I'm perfectly happy to sit down and read, 40 years of Robin comics or 70 years of Robin comics or whatever. For when I was hired to write Robin, what was important for me was to go back and read the complete run of that particular Robin series. There had been a number of Robin series, but this was a specific Robin. This was Tim Drake. And I needed to know what was going on in his life. And most importantly, what had gone on, say, in the year before I took over. So I read the whole run, but paid special attention to the writer who came before me, which was Bill Willingham, reading his stuff. But I also had to take into consideration the fact that DC wanted to take it in a different direction, in a new direction. This was part of an initiative they had called 1 Year Later, where they jumped the entire DC universe ahead by a year and didn't tell you what happened in the year in between. So they wanted to have the characters start out in a place that was unfamiliar to the readers, and then be able to go back and explain how you got from the end of Bill Willingham's run to the start of Adam Beechen's run. So that was a challenge, and that was fun. It's a certain amount of freedom because you're not trying to pick up in the middle of a story that another writer has just left off. But at the same time, you know, you're sort of out there. You're hoping that the story that you've come up with works, and it's going to be different from what came before. So you want to be ready for fan reaction to that. It's tricky. It's really tricky.
To piggyback on Ricky's question, does that mean you go to the DC office, you sit in the vault or the library and just thumb through back issues?
Well, I wish. The beauty of it now is that all this stuff is online, and you can find all these comics anywhere for a relatively small investment. But you know, I was perfectly happy at that point to go out and buy a bunch of comics and read them and collect them and keep them to learn about
And
him.
they're tax deductible.
Yeah, they're tax deductible. That's right. But DC does have a vault. I do know writers who have gone in and looked at old books and done research in them. And it never was something that I did. DC moved out to LA kind of late in my run working for them, so it never really came up. They will provide you with books if you ask for them. If you say, I need the last year's worth of whatever book, they'll send it to you if it's for a project and a storyline that they've approved that you're working on. So they're really good about that. They're really good about giving you the resources you need to be successful.
Got it. Question, anybody else?
I also have another one. So I do know that with like certain shows, they have pre-existing characters, and you can base a lot of the interpretation based off of what is already available. As a writer, did you ever have trouble, like if it was like a media that existed, but there wasn't a lot of existing lore that you can rely upon, like, you know, certain characters, they have repeated traits, or like this was like a big character trait thing. Did you ever have trouble with, like, if you were going to something brand new and they didn't really have sort of like existing like important facts about them, and how did you kind of like navigate that?
I would say that early in my career, that was a problem for me. I would come into a show and say, oh, they haven't done a whole lot with this character, and the backstory of this character hasn't been explained, and I'm going to make sure to work that into my script. And I learned kind of the hard way that it's best to talk to the producers and the head writers before you do something like that. Your job as a freelance writer on a TV show is to give the story editor what they ask for, what they've agreed with you on. So if you've got an outline and you go off to write it, you better follow that outline. You don't want to give them something they're not prepared for, because they're expecting a certain kind of script to come in. And if you go off the reservation, you can either be, you know, replaced in the middle of the process, or it's going to cost the show some time because you have to do another draft, or it's going to make the story editor do more work than maybe they're wanting to do. So, you know, your job as a freelance writer is to make the story editor's life as easy as possible, because they've got enough to do. They're supervising 7 or 8 other scripts that are going on at the same time. 4 and 5 other writers are going on at the same time. They're taking meetings to talk about storyboards. They're taking meetings to talk about next season. You want to make their life easy. You want to be easy to work with. That's how you're going to get hired again. You need to be easy, and you need to be a good writer. And part of being a good writer is following the outline and making it as good as it can be.
Now, thank you. Now, Jill had a question.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ricky.
Sure.
Hi, Adam. This
Hey.
is fascinating stuff. I'm trying to imagine the sandbox and how much of your time you spend as a solitary writer going, oh, how shall I figure all this out? And how much of it's meetings and how much of it is people in a boardroom getting upset and throwing things at each other? Like, what does the actual interaction look like?
Again, it depends on the show, depends on the studio, depends on the production company. There aren't a lot of animated shows anymore that have writers' rooms like you hear about for prime time. The studio doesn't want to pay people, I don't think, to be full-time sitting around talking about the show or whatever. They would much prefer it to be one person that they hire and pay a salary to, and then a bunch of freelancers. So particularly since COVID, a lot of that stuff has happened by Zoom. And you'll have what they call writers' summits at the beginning of seasons of shows where the story editor will bring in 6 or 7 writers, whether they know them or the studio has recommended them or whatever. We all get together on Zoom. We come prepared with pitches for that particular show, and we all pitch our ideas. And in the course of pitching our ideas, we get feedback from the other writers and from the producers, and we try and sort of bang ideas around until maybe we can find something that works together as a story. There's not a lot of throwing stuff that happens in that situation. It tends to be pretty productive, but I find it's always better to be in a room with other people when you're doing stuff like that, just because you can develop chemistry in a way that you can't over the course of Zoom, this Zoom aside. So, you know, I like being collaborative and working with other people face to face, but the nature of what we do, a lot of it is that you're sitting at your computer and you're typing, and that's what it is. That's the job.
I grew up on Dick Van Dyke, so I was hoping, you know, they would.
That Maury Amsterdam was going to come in at any moment. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm with you.
I think the Dick Van Dyke Show was based on Sid Caesar's show's writer's room, right?
You imagine?
Yeah. So,
Yes, that legendary, maybe the greatest writer's room of all time.
yeah, exactly. I once saw a family tree of people who came out of Sid Caesar's writer's room. And these were people who were writing Taxi, Cheers, you know. I mean, Woody Allen was in that writer's room. So
For a while, yeah, he was.
any other questions, guys? Because I have some of my own.
I have a
So-
I see a
question.
couple hands up.
Go ahead,
Hey.
go ahead, William.
Okay. Right. So I'm at that age where I have like a million things I want to do, like voice acting,
That's every age, William.
writing, those specifically. And I just graduated college, and I'm like, man, I like have to move out, and I'm not even sure like if they
Yeah.
would even accept me, and that's very risky. And I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe. And I was just wondering, like, at what age did you know that you wanted to be a writer? Because I did some research and I found out that you didn't get into writing until well after. I suppose you would have graduated college. And because um, and if you did want to become a writer in college or after college, where did you learn how to get a manuscript made?
Mostly in graduate school. And I always wanted to be a writer from the time I was in grade school. I wanted to tell stories in some capacity. I loved comic books. I didn't know how anybody broke into comic books. I didn't know it was a real job. I didn't know it was an industry. I didn't have the slightest clue. It seemed really impractical to set out to be a comic book writer at that time, just because I was so far removed. I grew up in Phoenix, which is pretty far removed from New York, which was where all the comic book companies were at that time. So I studied journalism when I was an undergraduate in college. And I thought, well, I'll at least be writing and I can be somewhat creative in doing that. I wound up not writing for the school paper. When I was in college, I wound up doing cartoons for the school paper because that was what I enjoyed. And again, after college, I didn't know how I could make a creative writing career work. So I took a job working in community relations for a hospital, where I edited a couple of magazines and wrote for a couple of magazines. And it wasn't for me. I did that for about 2 years, realized I wanted to tell my own stories and I better do it while I was young enough to do it. So I started looking at film schools and I applied to all the big film schools and I got accepted to the University of Texas. And I went to Austin, moved to Austin. I was 23 when I moved to Austin. I was there for 3 years. So I didn't come out to LA until I was 26, which is a little further advanced than most people in terms of age coming out here for the first time. I knew I was going to come out to LA, and I knew it was risky, like you're talking about. So my goal was to have as much of the work done to get set up in Los Angeles before I came out as I possibly could. So I came out to visit LA a couple of times. I got a sense of where things were in relation to each other. I contacted everybody I knew who worked in the film industry or television industry, or who knew somebody who worked in the film or television industry, so that I would be coming out here with people that I could talk to and not just feel like I was alone in this gigantic city, right? And it also gave me a chance to save up some money before I moved out here, which is also really important. Like I mentioned earlier, I had an agent before I came out here, so I didn't have to worry about that part of the process. You know, moving out here is tricky, and there's a lot to it. You've got to pursue your career, you've got to make a living, you got to find a place to live, you got to figure out how to network with people who are in the industry. A lot of full-time jobs. So the more legwork you can do before you get out here, the better off you're going to be. And I recommend that to anybody who wants to come out to LA.
I have another part to the question, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
almost done writing the first draft of this big book that is like my passion project.
Yeah.
And is that like a gateway to writing, like by publishing a book in some ways?
Depends on what you want to wind up writing. If you want to wind up writing novels and prose, then yeah, by all means. And the animation studios and TV studios and network love to read stuff that isn't traditional when looking at new writers. They in the old days, 20 years ago, you wrote a sample of an existing show. So you would write an episode of I don't know, CSI, and you would send it off to, you know, network executives, and they would read it and they would say, hey, this sounds like a CSI, this sounds like an actual episode of the show. This person knows how to put a story together, they got the voices of the characters, et cetera, et cetera. Nowadays, I think they're looking for new voices and different voices, and so they're reading plays, they are reading some fiction, they're reading novels, they're reading comic books, they're reading traditional scripts, but original scripts. They're not looking for samples of existing shows. They want to hear your voice. They figure they can teach you how to write for existing characters and get those voices right, but they want to know what your voice is going to be. So really anything that you write can be used as a sample. I would say a big book, and by big book, I mean more than 250 pages, is going to be hard to get read just because the readers don't have that much time. They want to be hooked within the first 10 pages of a script, the first 3 chapters of a book. They want to know right away whether or not you can do it. So a book is a great thing to write and a great thing to have under your belt. That's awesome. But you might want to try writing for other kinds of media as well, just to show that you know how to do that, and you know how to format it and know how to pace it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay, cool. Congratulations on graduating, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I
Questions?
do.
Who said
I
that?
do. Me.
Camille. Okay, Camille, go ahead. Can you
Do you find
turn on your video? That'd be
sorry, not today.
okay,
sorry.
that's fine. Go ahead.
Do you find the animation process easier as it is today, or was it easier back when you were first starting?
It's always been hard. You're talking about breaking in?
Yeah, I guess so.
It's always been hard. You have to meet the people who are going to be reading your scripts. You gotta have to meet the people who are the executives at the company, and it's hard to do that if you don't know anybody and you don't have connections to those people to begin with. Which is why I say again, do your legwork before you come out here, and by that, you know, write down the names of anybody you know who's involved with the industry in any way. What you want to do is get close to a production that's in production so that you can have access to the people who make television, who make the cartoons, and develop relationships once you have those connections. And however you do it is however you do it. And it's in some ways it's harder now because of COVID, and we're all working at home, and there aren't as many opportunities to socialize with others, but there are opportunities to do that. There are also plenty of writing groups over over Zoom, with people who go on to work in the industry and remember the folks that they were in a writers group with. So that's a good investment as well. It's never going to be easy. If it was easy, there'd be a lot more people probably doing it.
Okay, thank you. Also, big fan of your
Sure.
shows.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? I know Bob asked on the chat how you got your first comic book project, but we covered that very, very early on.
I have one more actually, if that's all
Sure.
right.
Go ahead.
Your story of pairing with your agent is kind of crazy. I mean,
Absolutely.
that she didn't have any agenting credits to her name, and she just said, "I'm an agent" on the letterhead, and you're like, "All right, cool." But I mean,
Yeah.
clearly it was a fruitful connection for you. So what about her convinced you that she was the right person for you professionally, given her lack of credentials and accomplishments up to that point?
At that time, it was the fact that she liked me. It was her greatest credential. When you're starting out, you want any agent that you can get, whether they're super experienced and they're high powered, or there's somebody who just has a letterhead that says I'm an agent. My agent, Sue, was a lovely lady. She was great, and she was a pit bull. She didn't know anything about the industry, but she really wanted to learn, and she was happy to make phone calls and happy to knock on doors from upstate New York. And so she was great. Ultimately, because she wasn't out here in LA and she didn't have those day-to-day connections with producers and studios, she wasn't the right agent for me as my career went on. But to start with, she was terrific because she got me introductory meetings all over the place, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. So it was her chutzpah, if you know the meaning of that word, that really attracted me to her, and the fact that she wanted to take me on as a client.
Great question. I'd imagine she was very hungry also.
She was, yeah, she was great. But she didn't really know the industry very well. So, and this will tell you how long ago this was. The script that I sent to her was a Frasier script when Frasier was on the first time around.
The first time. Okay.
I told you, her son read it and he liked it and said, "Hey, this sounds like a Frasier script." She said, "Yeah, okay." And she looked at the script and she saw Frasier on the front. She said, "Oh, well, he misspelled Frasier." And so she retyped it with a Z and sent it out as a writing sample, which didn't reflect super well on me. But we got that cleared up, and it wound up working out okay. But which is another lesson, which is make sure that your script is as bulletproof as you can possibly get it before you send it out to people. Don't have misspellings, don't have formatting errors. Make sure you've got all the locations that are right for that particular show. People out here look for reasons to say no to new writers. Nobody wants to stick their neck out for somebody new. It's very rare. So you don't want to give people who are going to be considering you for jobs any reasons to say no if you can help it.
Okay.
I can attest that is very true in the New York publishing world as well. I bet people just have so many submissions to read. It's like, if you do one little thing wrong or say one thing that's even a little bit off-putting, it's like goodbye. So
yep,
it's tough. It's
absolutely
tough out there.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a script reader and I would read, original movie scripts or whatever, if they weren't following format, and I knew it in the first 10 pages, I thought to myself, this is going to be a really hard sell. It's going to be hard for them to convince me that they know what they're doing and they know how to tell this story. So again, you just don't want to give people reasons.
And actually, it's a great segue into my second to the last question, because we are at the 1 hour mark. What kind of personality traits do you think makes for a good, script writer in television?
Being easy to work with. That to me is number one. You want to be someone who knows how to take a note from somebody. You don't want to be the person that fights every note that you get. You got to be open to other people's suggestions and ideas. You have to sublimate your ego a little bit when you're working with other people in a television situation, because Again, you don't have full control. You want to be someone who can play off of other people, who can hear something in someone's idea and build on it. I recommend improv classes and acting classes to all writers, just because it gives you experience at coming up with stories for your characters that you're portraying on stage. And it teaches you how to bounce ideas and process off of other people. So those are good personality traits. The rest of it is really mechanical. Like, don't be late. Don't turn in a 70-page script when you have an assignment for a 22-page script. It's making sure you give the people what they need that you're working for. Remember who you're working for.
Got it. Okay, so my last question is this. What is your dream project or dream situation that you haven't done yet?
I've always wanted to write for DC Comics, the Legion of Superheroes. That is the comic that I've always wanted to write. Those are the characters I've always wanted to write. I've loved them since I was 11 or 12 years old. I love big team books where you can have 4 characters from the team in one issue and then put them aside and do the next 3 issues with 6 different characters. And weaving storylines together and building worlds and building the entire universe of a series. To me, that's the stuff that I love. Late in my career writing for DC, I wrote a book for Wildstorm called Wildcat, and I did that for a year. And that cast was, I think we had 70 characters. It was a strange time in the Wildstorm universe. We had about 70 characters in our book. And we had to figure out a way to service all of them or believably occupy them at the very least. And it was by far the most fun I've had working on a comic, just because it was most like what I imagined writing the Legion would be.
Now, you've got quite, the credentials. What's stopping you from just calling up DC and saying, "Hey, I'd love to pitch some Legion ideas"?
Nothing really, except I don't know the editors. They maybe know my work. A couple of generations of editors have come and gone since I really was a full-time writer for DC. I just don't know the people. And also, when I was writing comics for DC, I wasn't one of the top-selling writers by any stretch of the imagination. The comics I wrote did fairly well. They did okay, but I don't think that I was a name writer for DC that people were clamoring for. And that's fine. So, I would like to get back into writing for the big 2 at some point, if that's possible. If not, I am very grateful that I had my chance to do it. And I got to write for so many characters that I loved growing up, and wrote some stories that I'm proud of and that are going to be part of those characters' histories forever.
Now, you said earlier that when you pitch to an editor, they ask you, why would you want to write comics when you're already doing TV, right? So I'm asking that question now. Why would you want to write comics when you're already doing TV?
Because I love the medium. I am so attached to it emotionally from when I was a kid that the chance to see my name in a credit box, to see my dialogue being spoken by Superman, it doesn't get better than that.
Would you want to be writing comics and doing TV, or if you could, you would just write comics?
Well, I did do both for about 10 years there. So, I just like to write, and I want to tell stories, and whatever medium people will allow me to tell stories in, where hopefully I can get paid, that's the best thing ever. But even if I wasn't getting paid, I'd still be writing because that's what I love to do. And frankly, I'm not qualified to do anything else.
I love what you just said, because I've been grappling with the whole why am I doing this thing lately. But anyways, thank you very much. I don't have anybody scheduled for next month, but I'll find.
Okay, I can come back. It's fine. I'll be back. That's all right.
Well, you can get Adam again, because I'm sure people have more questions. If we could please give a big round of applause. I think this is great. Very enlightening, very educational, very informative. And
my pleasure. Find me on Facebook if you have other questions.
Is there anything you want to plug? I'm not sure if there's anything you're working on that you would like people to know about.
It's either I don't have stuff, or it's stuff that I can't talk about yet.
And is there any social media where people can follow you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. You guys can find me there. I'm on Twitter, although I don't tweet. Sorry, X. Although I don't X very often. My handle is at Sonova, SONNOVA. And I'm on Instagram, but I rarely post there as well. Probably the best place to find me is Facebook. I also have a website, adambeechen.com, where you can write to me and I'll write you back.
Awesome. Well, again, Adam, thank you very much. It was great reconnecting with you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'll see you around Facebook, or next time in California, maybe we'll run into each other at some place.
Well, please let me know if you come out here.
Will do.
All right.
Again, thank you everybody for coming, and again, let's give a nice thank you to Adam.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Take
much,
care.
Adam.
You
Thank
bet.
you, Adam.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Adam.
You bet.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, guys.